Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tap Journal. The boundary separating the United States and Mexico is a sprawling landscape of steel, concrete, and high-tech surveillance that spans nearly 2,000 miles. What began as a series of simple stone markers and livestock fences has transformed into one of the most complex and contentious geopolitical structures in modern history. This investigation explores the tactical evolution of this barrier and the strategic shifts that redefined a continent. The formal demarcation of the border began with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, following the Mexican-American War. According to official records from the National Archives, this treaty forced Mexico to cede 55% of its territory, including present-day California, Arizona, and New Mexico. The initial boundary was marked not by walls, but by stone monuments placed at specific intervals across the desert. These markers were intended to define national sovereignty, rather than to prevent the movement of people or trade. In 1853, the U.S. government finalized the Gadsden Purchase to acquire additional land for a southern transcontinental railroad route. Based on documents from the Department of State, this purchase established the final southern borders of Arizona and New Mexico. For several decades, the border remained largely open and was characterized by a fluid exchange of labor and goods. During this era, there was no federal agency dedicated to patrolling the vast stretches of the American Southwest. The first physical fences were not designed to stop humans, but to manage livestock and prevent the spread of disease. According to historical files from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, several miles of barbed wire were installed in 1909 near San Diego and Calexico. These barriers were specifically aimed at preventing tick-infested Mexican cattle from entering U.S. grazing lands. At this stage, the border was a concern for ranchers and veterinarians, rather than national security officials. The geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically during the Mexican Revolution, which began in 1910. Intelligence reports from the era indicate that the U.S. military was deployed to the border to prevent the conflict from spilling over into American territory. This period saw the first significant military presence along the line, as troops monitored the movements of various revolutionary factions. Despite the tension, no permanent wall was proposed during this decade of upheaval. The passage of the 1924 Labor Appropriation Act marked a turning point with the creation of the U.S. Border Patrol. According to official government files, the agency was initially established to combat illegal entries and the smuggling of alcohol during the Prohibition era. Mounted inspectors patrolled the Rio Grande and the desert on horseback, focusing on high-traffic corridors. The focus of enforcement was primarily on European and Asian immigrants who attempted to bypass coastal ports of entry. During World War II, the demand for agricultural labor led to the creation of the Bracero program in 1942. Based on records from the Department of Labor, this agreement allowed millions of Mexican citizens to work legally on American farms. However, the end of the war brought a shift in public sentiment and a desire for stricter border controls. This resulted in Operation Wetback in 1954. A massive enforcement effort that involved the deportation of hundreds of thousands of individuals. The 1960s and 1970s saw the emergence of urban fencing in cities like El Paso and San Diego. According to archives from the International Boundary and Water Commission, these early fences were often made of chain-link material and were easily bypassed. In 1979, the Carter administration proposed a more substantial fence in the San Diego sector, which critics mockingly labeled the tortilla curtain. This plan faced significant backlash and highlighted the growing tension between border security and diplomatic relations. The 1980s brought the war on drugs into the forefront of border policy. Based on intelligence reports from the Drug Enforcement Administration, smuggling cartels began using remote desert routes to transport narcotics into the U.S. interior. In response, the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. While it granted amnesty to millions, it also provided increased funding for border technology and personnel to deter future illegal crossings. The modern era of the border wall truly began in 1994 with the implementation of Operation Gatekeeper. According to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection historical logs, this strategic initiative focused on San Diego, where the majority of illegal crossings occurred. The government installed 14 miles of fencing made from recycled steel helicopter landing mats from the Vietnam War era. This tactical move was designed to push migrants away from urban centers and into the harsh, life-threatening terrain of the mountains and deserts. Simultaneously, the El Paso sector launched Operation Hold the Line to saturate the riverfront with agents and physical barriers. Based on reports from the Congressional Research Service, these operations were based on a strategy called prevention through deterrence. The logic was that if the crossing became difficult and dangerous enough, people would stop attempting the journey. However, the strategy resulted in a dramatic increase in migrant deaths as people were forced into the brutal heat of the Sonoran Desert. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, fundamentally changed the way the U.S. viewed its borders. According to the Department of Homeland Security files, the border was no longer just an immigration issue, but a critical component of national defense. The Secure Fence Act of 2006, signed by President George W. Bush, authorized the construction of 700 miles of reinforced fencing. This legislation received bipartisan support and led to the installation of various barriers, including pedestrian fences and vehicle bollards. By the end of the Bush administration, hundreds of miles of new barriers had been constructed across several states. Based on data from the Government Accountability Office, the project faced numerous challenges, including lawsuits from private landowners and environmental groups. The construction often ignored existing environmental laws to expedite the building process in sensitive habitats. Despite these hurdles, the physical footprint of the border wall expanded more between 2006 and 2009 than in the previous century. The Obama administration continued to refine the border infrastructure by focusing on a virtual wall. According to surveillance camera logs and procurement records, the government invested heavily in towers, sensors, and drones. This technological approach was intended to supplement the physical fences and provide agents with real-time situational awareness. While physical construction slowed during this period, the integration of high-tech monitoring systems reached unprecedented levels. The 2016 presidential election brought a renewed and highly publicized focus on the physical wall. President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13767 shortly after taking office, directing the construction of a contiguous wall along the entire border. Based on official statements from the White House, the new design called for 30-foot steel bollards filled with concrete and rebar. This phase of construction aimed to replace older, shorter fencing with more formidable and intimidating structures. To fund this massive project, the administration declared a national emergency in 2019 after a stalemate with Congress. According to court trial archives, this allowed the government to divert billions of dollars from the Department of Defense budget to border construction. The project faced intense legal scrutiny, yet construction proceeded rapidly in areas like the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. This led to significant controversy regarding the destruction of indigenous sacred sites and protected wilderness. By the time the Trump administration ended, approximately 450 miles of new and replacement wall had been completed. Based on reports from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, most of this work involved replacing existing, dilapidated barriers with the new high bollard design. Only about 80 miles of the wall were built in areas where no previous barrier existed. The cost of the project was estimated at over $15 billion, making it one of the most expensive infrastructure projects in U.S. history. The Biden administration took office in 2021 and immediately issued a proclamation to pause all wall construction. According to the Department of Homeland Security updates, the government began reviewing the legality of the funding and the environmental impacts of the existing structures. However, certain gaps in the wall were later filled to ensure the safety of agents and migrants in specific sectors. The administration shifted its focus towards smarter border technology and addressing the root causes of migration in Central America. The border today is a patchwork of various designs, from 19th century monuments to 21st century steel towers. According to the International Boundary and Water Commission, the physical wall now covers approximately 654 miles of the nearly 2,000-mile border. The remaining sections consist of rugged mountains, the winding Rio Grande, and vast stretches of private ranch land. The barrier remains a potent symbol of the tension between national security and the humanitarian realities of the Western Hemisphere. Environmentalists continue to document the impact of the wall on wildlife migration patterns. Based on reports from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the barrier fragments the habitats of endangered species, like the jaguar and the ocelot. These animals are unable to cross the steel bollards to find food, water, or mates, threatening their long-term survival in the region. The wall has fundamentally altered the ecology of the borderlands in ways that may take decades to fully understand. The historical evolution of the Mexico-U.S. border wall reflects a century of shifting political priorities and social anxieties. What began as a line on a map has become a massive physical and technological apparatus that defines the relationship between two nations. As the debate over its effectiveness and morality continues, the wall remains a permanent fixture of the North American landscape. It stands as a testament to the lengths a nation will go to define its limits and protect its perceived interests. Maybe that is all the mystery we can investigate this time. And do not forget to click subscribe and like this channel so you do not miss other crime mysteries. See you in the next unsolved case.